Hello, I'm Harry Glorikian. Welcome to the Harry Glorikian Show, the interview podcast that explores how technology is changing everything we know about healthcare. Artificial intelligence, big data, predictive analytics. In fields like these, breakthroughs are happening much faster than most people realize. If you want to be proactive about your own healthcare and the healthcare of your loved ones, you'll need to learn some of these new tips and techniques of how medicine is changing and how you can take advantage of all the new options. Explaining this approaching world is the mission of the new book I have coming out soon, The Future You. It's also our theme here on the show, where we bring you the conversations with innovators, caregivers, and patient advocates who are transforming the healthcare system and working to push it in positive directions. Everyone's used to the idea that if they're being treated in a hospital, they'll probably get wired up to sensors that track their heart rate or respiration rate or blood oxygen level. We've talked on the show before about a new generation of portable medical sensors for everyday life, like glucose monitoring for people with diabetes. And some people even wear medical sensors on their wrist in the form of their Fitbit or Apple Watch. Some of these devices can go beyond fitness monitoring to alert wearers to problems like cardiac arrhythmia. But what if medical sensors were woven into your very clothing? My guest this week is Venk Varadan, and he's the CEO and co-founder of a company called Nanoware that's taken a big step in that direction. Nanoware has developed a way to put microscopic nanosensors inside clothes. If that cloth is worn against the skin, it can pick up electrical charges that reveal heart rate, heart rhythms, respiration rate, and physical activity and relay that information to doctors in real time. Nanoware's leading product is a sash called SimpleSense that fits over the shoulder and around the torso. And last month, the company won FDA approval for the software package that goes with the SimpleSense sash and turns it into a diagnostic and predictive device. But Varadan says that in the future, the nanosensors and the software could be put into even more places, like headbands, conventional clothing, or bed sheets. That's just one example of the explosion in mobile health technology that's putting more power into the hands of patients. And it's also one of the topics in my book, The Future You, which is available now in Kindle ebook format. You can get your copy by going to Amazon.com and searching for The Future You by Harry Glorikian. The book grows partly out of conversations like the ones I have here on the podcast with medical researchers and entrepreneurs, but it goes even deeper into the impact of wearable sensors, AI, and so many other technologies that have the potential to help us live longer, healthier lives. So I hope you'll check it out. And now on to my conversation with Venk Varadan. Venk, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Harry.
So, like we all know that with technology startups, there's always this sort of chicken and the egg question. What came first in the mind of the inventors? The market need, the product that needs to address it? Ideally they come together simultaneously and there's a back and forth dialogue between founders and potential customers, and you end up with a startup community calls it, what is it? Product market fit. If I talk to my, my Silicon Valley nephew of mine. So in the case of Nanoware, did you start to think about the problem and how to solve it? Or did you start out with the technology, which in your case, involves a way to embed these tiny nanopillar sensors in the cloth and then look at ways to make it sellable? So which one was it for you?
Great question, Harry. And again, thanks for having me on the podcast. We were squarely the latter. And I think most entrepreneurs are the former. But we had this great advanced material, cloth-based nanotechnology could pick up really, really high fidelity, clinical grade biomarker data off the body and we didn't really know what to do with it. Do we start as a consumer company, work on fitness, B2B sports? Do we think about industrial safety, military use cases? They've been trying to figure out smart textiles forever. Or do we go into healthcare? And I think stubbornly so, and a little bit of altruism, we chose the harder route, which was healthcare. But I think it was more premised on that we believed in the quality of the sensor. It was doing something from a quality and quantity standpoint that no other on-body sensor or non-invasive sensor out there could do, whether it was consumer grade off the shelf or healthcare-based electrodes. So all we really knew when we started is that we wanted to be a healthcare company, but we didn't know the right application to start with.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's pick the hardest one and see if we can get over that hill. So let's back up here and talk about like the medical need you're trying to address. I mean, at a high level, why is portable diagnostic sensing so important for people's health?
I think it was always important because of an access issue, right? Not everybody can go see a physician or can do high cost diagnostic tests that require facility or diagnostic tools in person. And there's a cost even to running a blood pressure cuff or checking your heart with a stethoscope or running a hemodynamic monitor, all the way up to more expensive tests like sleep studies and sleep labs. So I think remote diagnostic needs started with an access issue. And it's not like we haven't had telemedicine in the past. But even that was sort of limited to access issues. You needed a broadband network, you needed particular devices, you needed smartphones. And there were a lot of industry, I guess, pressures holding this sort of need to sort of push healthcare out into the more wide stream for those that have access issues. And, we all said that this was going to happen one day: virtual care, telemedicine, remote monitoring at home, replacing offices at home. And it was a nice soundbite, and COVID kind of forced the issue. And I think completely accelerated that 10-year frame on the need, right? Because folks were still sick, folks still had chronic disease, folks still needed acute procedures, but you weren't really able to do a lot before, during, and after if you had to have these people camped out in the hospital or in outpatient clinics or acute surgical centers. So that's when, while everybody thought it was cool, and one day I'll employ these digital technologies, it really had COVID to shut their business down where they couldn't see patients to force them to adopt. So I think a lot of our companies like us, we were all doing the right thing. And we also were the first to admit that we got fortunate that the pandemic sort of accelerated the need for our solutions.
Yeah, I mean, I remember I put together, God, it's got to be like 15 plus years ago. I put together a distributed diagnostics conference because I was like, this is going to happen. And well, okay, eventually. But so let's step back for a minute and talk about some of the specific medical conditions where sort of, your system is a continuous, high resolution, high fidelity data is useful. Like, I know we need to probably start with congestive heart failure.
Yeah, so that's where we actually started before COVID. That was the sort of market need where our technology, our ability to sort of simultaneously and synchronously look at biomarkers from the heart, from the lungs, the upper vascular system in a sort of contiguous way and sort of map the trends over the same period of time, as you would with a stethoscope, a blood pressure cuff, an electrocardiograph, a hemodynamic monitor, if they were all in one platform. That's really what we're, replacing as part of our solution and our device-enabled platform. But the economics of heart failure and the business need were really what was pulling us there, in the sense that there were penalties from CMS to avoid that next hospitalization within 30 days. And many of these patients are one in four are being readmitted within 30 days. 1 in 2 are readmitted within 6 months. So this isn't a problem that we can just medicate our way out. We have to understand when risk is or decompensation of the heart is happening before symptoms show up, because once symptoms showed up and fluids accumulated in your lungs, it's already too late. So I think there was a good product need for us, as well as the economic need with reimbursement and solutions for something that can be done outside the body that, you know, a patient could be using at home. And then I think, you know, COVID hit and the market applications really just exploded beyond heart failure. Heart failure is still on our roadmap, our clinical study to prove that alert algorithm of, we take all these data points, send it into the cloud, do a risk-based predictive algorithm to predict worsening heart failure, decompensating heart failure weeks before fluid accumulates in the lungs. That's still firmly on our roadmap. We just got to restart the study that was halted due to COVID. But the same product that does the same parameters with a different sort of algorithmic use cases opened up a lot of other applications that now have a business need and an economic need to use us. So the two that we're starting with is post-procedural or post-surgical follow-up in an acute use case setting. And the second is outpatient cardiology, longitudinal care for someone who unfortunately probably has to see a cardiologist for the rest of their life.
And if I'm not mistaken, congratulations are in order because of an FDA approval?
Yes, so we actually got our third 510K just 2 days ago. So on September 21st, September 22nd, we got our third 510K. This is actually an example of our first digital only clearance. So our first two clearances, our first clearance in 2016 was primarily around the advanced material, the nanotechnology, to get FDA comfortable in its safety and efficacy profile. The second was for our product, which is the SimpleSense shoulder sash, which simultaneous and synchronously captures data across the heart, lung, and upper vascular system biomarkers, feeds that data through a mobile application and into the cloud. And then this clearance is sort of for an end-to-end digital infrastructure that circularly includes ingestion of our 85 biomarkers and then analytics circularly across our end-to-end spectrum that continues to sort of process and then has the ability to push insights or algorithmic alerts down. So that last part is not included. But if you think about it, Harry, we kind of had a strategy before we got to the AI part. Now everything we submit with FDA has nothing to do with the device, has nothing to do with software infrastructure, has nothing to do with what would be MDDS or what wouldn't be. We can simply send in statistical analysis on the AI algorithms based on the inputs that we've already cleared, right, and then looking retroactively on the outcome. So it's a nice win for us to kind of show that we're not a device company, we're a device-enabled platform. But I think what it's really exciting the market on is that we're ready for AI diagnostics. We hope to have a first one and our fourth 510K, I guess, here with FDA pretty soon in a complex chronic disease state. So really exciting times for us.
Yeah, and I mean, as an investor, I mean, I've been in diagnostics forever, and I'm so focused on where's the data. Show me the exponential nature of the data, and then what we can do with it, and really like blow that up, right? That's where I see the value in these platforms and technologies. But let's step back for a minute, right? So there are technically other methods that had been used, right? That you might or might not say are competitive in some way, but one of them is called a Holter monitor, right? Mm-hmm. Which people put on their skin to monitor, electrocardiogram and ECG rhythms outside the hospital, right? And so how does, and I don't want to say the name wrong, but I think it's Simple ECG for yours, and then SimpleSense vest compare to that. What are the alternatives? How long do you wear it, and how do you compare it to the existing status quo?
Sure. So, a Holter monitor has a specific use case. It's looking at your electrocardiograph rhythm to see if you have a rhythm or abnormality, right? So one of the metrics we capture is electrocardiograph, right? And we do multiple channels of that, so it's not a single lead. So we could certainly compete against that application. and just look at rhythm abnormalities. In the same way, companies like iRhythm have, and Apple Watch has that 30-second feature on it. We are not playing in that space. And the difference between us, even though our signal quality, we would argue, is much cleaner than a Holter monitor that's using standard electrode cardiographs. With those, you have to shave, your chest. You have to sand the dead skin down. You have to put gel on for the electrode to get a conductive signal. We don't have to do any of that because of the nanotechnology. But what the nanotechnology also affords, in addition to a better experience and better quality, is the ability to do more than just a Holter monitor. Right? So imagine if that same Holter monitor wasn't just looking at rhythm abnormalities. It was also looking at the acoustics of your heart and your lungs, the sounds of your heart and your lungs. It was looking at the flow characteristics, the blood ejection times, the fluid accumulation in your lungs. It was looking at your breathing rate, your breaths per minute, your lung capacity, your changes in lung capacity over time. It was looking at your pressure-related issues at the aorta, systolic and diastolic blood pressure. In addition to being a better experience in all of these and sort of kind of replacing a Holter monitor and a stethoscope and what have you, the real value is being able to do all of that at the same period of time, over the same period of time. So even if I'm monitoring for, our use cases are about 30 minutes to an hour in the morning, 30 minutes to an hour at night. And because we're getting such dense quality and quantity of data over that time period, we can actually see trends across the cardiopulmonary and upper vascular complex, which is actually the first company and platform that can do that. And that may not have been important before COVID, but COVID, I think, was revelatory in the sense that COVID may have started as a respiratory disease, but it affects the heart, it affects the upper vascular system. You can get a DVT from it. And I think it opened the world's eyes into understanding, if we're not looking at all of these systems, the heart, lungs, and upper vascular system, that all work together and you work uniquely in each of our own bodies, we're only getting a risk-based signature on just cardiac rhythm or just breaths per minute or just the sound murmurs of your heart. Whereas we're doing a composite now.
Yeah. So for a guy like me, I'm like, oh my God, how do I get one of these? I want one of these right now. I'm thinking like, oh, I could use it when I'm like right after I work out, and I'm, forget the I'm sick part of it. I want to use it as a wellness monitoring and sort of to see, get a baseline. Tell me where I'm going, right? Over time. That's what I'm always like discussing with my physician is we need a baseline because I don't know how it's going to change over time. Sure. If I only look at it at that point in the future, I don't know what it was. So, but the other side, I think to myself, there are physicians listening to this show that are probably all excited about this. And there are physicians going, that's a lot of different data points. How in the hell am I going to make sense of that?
Yeah.
And so I'm assuming what you're going to tell me is you've got this amazing software that lets you visualize, and make sense of all these different parameters together.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We were actually stubbornly annoying to our KOLs, our clinical teams, as well as our original customers in beta rollouts, because Harry, we agreed with you. We looked at where Gen 1 and Gen 2 sort of digital health companies struggled in healthcare. Health and wellness is a little bit different, right? They're consumers of data. They to his their own, right? I mean, if you market well, you'll find that pocket of people that want to be overwhelmed with data or what have you. But we really listened to what digital health was doing for the provider and patient relationship. There were some good things there, and there were other bad things. And the bad things we realized actually wasn't monolithic between clinics. Some people thought that bad things were, I'm alerted too often. Others wanted to be alerted all the time. Some were like, oh, this is noisy data. It's too unclean. Others were saying, I just need, 70% C- level data, right? And then we were thinking about all of those aspects, which we couldn't get consensus on. How do you bring all of those aspects that gives control to the provider, so the provider can say, how often are they alerted? How much data in the raw signals do I want to look at? How much do I not want to look at? and really with the thesis of building the platform on them spending less time than what they do before. Because I think Gen 1 and Gen 2 products, unfortunately, actually added more time in adjudication and frequency of the provider being notified, and also caused some anxiety for patients as well, because they were looking at their screen and their data at all times. So we really tried to be sponges of all of those different devices that were tech enabled and sort of moving from 100-year-old devices to now Gen 1, Gen 2, pushing into the cloud, and really listened on, and I'll tell you, it was mostly from staff. It wasn't necessarily from the physicians and the surgeons themselves. It was mostly from triage nurse, from healthcare staff, the people that are running around, coordinating the follow-up visits, coordinating the phone calls from patients that were doing poorly or feeling bad after feeling sick after a procedure. And I just think we just kept our ears open and didn't go in saying, we know what you need. We were asking, what do you?
Right. So let's talk about the technology itself, right? The SimpleSense wearable sash. Like, how does the cloth sensor in the garment work? I mean, on a microscopic level, what are the kind of changes that this nanopillar detects and how?
Yeah, so not to get too sort of granular into the physics, although I'm happy to, Harry, if your audience ends up sending me some questions. But think about our ability to just detect a difference in potential, action potential, from point A of a vector to point B. And it's an oversimplified way of describing what we do, but the reason we can do it better than anybody else with any other sensor, and that's what really feeds the cleanliness and the quality of our data and allows us to derive so many biomarkers that others can't, which obviously feeds the ability for AI, is because we've got these billions of vertically standing nanosensors per centimeter of surface area. The differential or the potential difference that we can find because our signal quality is so clean is so narrow. Whereas other sensors that might be treated as noise, we can consistently see deltas from point A of a vector to point B and know exactly what caused those deltas, right? And that's unique to us and our vector orientation. Again, I'm getting probably a little too wonky here, but if you have a vector across the largest slice of the heart, across the largest slice of the lungs, across the upper vascular system in its entirety, with those with that finite ability to get really microscopic level changes in potential, irrespective of what signal you're looking at, because once we know what signal we're looking for, we just set the frequency bands for those, right?
Right.
And that's really in a nutshell how it works across the multiple parameters that we can capture from a biomarker standpoint.
So what are, you said 85 biomarkers, right? We're not going to go through all of them because we'll be at the end of the show, but
Right.
What are the kinds of, let's say, physiological data that you're pulling in and that you're differentiating on?
Sure. So I'd probably summarize it into several different buckets that each have maybe 20 or 30 derivatives under it. But, cardiopulmonary biomarkers. So the coupling between the cardio and pulmonary complexes, impedance cardiography, thoracic impedance, and then looking at not only the means and the median trends across those metrics, but the standard deviations. So one of our board members famously said, Nadim Yared, the CEO of CVRX, you learn so much more from the standard deviations than you will from the trends. Don't just look at the sort of mean of the trend. So that's an example, cardiopulmonary. We look at the electrical signals of the cardio complex and electrocardiographs. We look at a combinatory, methodology of cardiographs, acoustics, BMI, height, and weight. And then we tie activity, posture, movement. What is your sleep orientation? Are you sleeping on your left side? Are you sleeping on your right side? all of these sort of things together actually enable some really interesting insights from a machine learning standpoint. And again, the beauty of our ability to sort of understand them and see more biomarkers. 85 is what we know right now, what we validated. There's probably a lot more that we will discover under certain disease states. But what we're able to sort of mesh together from all of those are really cool aspects, like blood ejection times. That's not a physical raw metric we're getting. That's a derived metric in combining a lot of these aspects. Cardiac output, stroke volume. These are things that could only have previously been done with an arterial line in your body in a hospital system. So I don't know if that answers your question.
No, I mean, listen, I mean, this is why I invest in this space, because, theoretically, as I get older, I may be a patient, and, the better these technologies get, the better off I'm going to be. But so let's talk about for a second, where did this originate from? And I think your father had something to do with this, if my research is correct.
He sure did. This may be a little bit of a long-winded answer, Harry, but for your audience, I'll tell the story because it's important for Dad to be happy at all times, even though I'm 4 years old. So Dr. Vijay Varadan is our co-founder and chief innovation officer. My father, 40-plus year academic researcher in the fields of materials research and biomedical engineering. And this was actually Nanoware's core technology was actually a culmination of his life's work. Back in the 80s and the 90s, when I was still a young pup, and he was convincing me to go be a doctor, he was doing research in this field, and it wasn't even called nanotechnology back then. There wasn't a term for it. But he was doing defense-related projects in the ability to detect very minute signals at very, very difficult detection environments. So an example is submarine coding, right? Submarines, when they're below water, are picking up their external environment information through sonar. The deeper they get in the ocean, the harder that sonar frequency is to be able to differentiate. Is that a school of plankton? Is that a whale? Is that a thermal geyser that's sending me the signal? Or is it a Russian sub, right? And his thesis was, if I have a really big footprint of sensors, an exponentially higher surface area of sensors, and not just one sensor or two or 100, but billions across the hull, I can start to differentiate over time the nuanced differences between the sonar a whale emits, the sonar a thermal geyser emits, or, oh, by the way, what are our friends in the USSR emitting, right? And that's an example in really, really hard to detect environments. He did the same with observatory jets and missile defense systems at 75,000 feet, the opposite, very high frequencies at very high speeds. So that original thesis, the human body is also a very complex environment and hard to detect environment as well, right? So in long story short, he kind of took that same thesis over many years of playing around in the lab and publishing papers and doing great work for for our government and our Department of Defense, but also with an eye to the future on what could this do in the human body.
Right.
So,
well, that's great. I mean, it's I'm sure he's very happy that you two are working together to bring this to market. So
he's not as disappointed in me about not going to med school anymore. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
In seriousness,
parents happy is a difficult thing. I know many people are like, "Are you going to be a doctor? Or are you going to be a lawyer?" I know the joke. So. You've got FDA approval for a number of your as you said, you're building on top of this layering that you've been doing from an FDA approval standpoint. What did it take to get them to sign off? What sort of evidence, did they need to see?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that we kind of had to create our own playbook with them, and I'm sure if they're listening, they don't want to hear this, because you're not supposed to sort of commend and compliment the agency. They're just supposed to be there as sort of the gatekeepers. But we used to hear just a lot of horror stories like, oh man, working with the agency, it's really tough. They're really tough on this. I mean, we always looked at them as our partners. We were bringing a novel technology to the world. We chose to go into a regulated environment because we believed in the promise of saving patients. We were not taking a sort of anti-regulation attitude that I can fix this, government, get out of my way. I'm a patient first. I like living in a country with FDA where something is scrutinized that I have to take when I'm sick. And I think that attitude and going into it from us as a product and R&D team, first of all, helped in clarifying our understanding of FDA's processes, because it's a lot and you really need to dig through the guidance in that. But I would say this is really hats off, Harry, to our founding engineers. I mean, they went from being engineers to really understanding process. And that's really what FDA is. Our first clearance, we went down to Washington 11 times in person to demo, to ask questions, continuing saying, hey, we read this part of the guidance. Does this make sense for us? And we shut up and listened. When we didn't agree with them, we said, but what do you think about this? Doesn't this solve it? We weren't trying to go around their answer. We were trying to develop sort of new understandings of it. And I think collaboratively, we put together a good playbook with FDA, to clear a material that they had never seen before, right? It would be one thing if we used a standard electrode like all Holter monitors do and combined it with something else and did different things on the software side. That would be somewhat straightforward because they know the data that's being generated is off of the standard electrode. But for us, we had to do a lot of different and in many cases much more rigorous testing, which that was painful. Don't get me wrong, but totally worth it, right? I mean, our sort of boundaries and our understanding of what FDA put us through turned out to be a boon in disguise. I mean, our whole team can sort of run through the needs now of FDA, and we feel very experienced and very well equipped on how they think, and now that they're comfortable with the sort of data we capture, all the great things we can do on the AI side, which is still scary to a lot of people. You just say, I've got a black box and I'm combing electronic medical records, and here's what the unsupervised learning tells me. If I was a regulator, I'd be like, wow, I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole. So it's different with us, right? I mean, we can define everything that's coming in and we can define the outputs. Yes, the AI in the middle is the magic, but we're not sort of undefining everything until the outcomes, right? Which is where I think a lot of AI companies got into trouble. So I think it was all worth
it's funny because
progression with the FDA.
Yeah, I mean, I always say to people, I'm like, listen, they're not the enemy. Actually, they can make your life easier because, and I say, people tell me, well, I'm not going to go until I'm absolutely done. I'm like, if you wait that long and they tell you you're wrong, you just spend a whole lot of money and you're wrong, right? So you should look at them as your partner, right? And I'm assuming you worked with the digital health group at the FDA.
We worked consistently. We worked with CDRH, and now actually as a board member on AdvaMed and sitting on the executive leadership group for digital health. AdvaMed's the trade association that works with FDA and with CMS on industry innovation. CDRH does have its own sort of digital health group within it that's focusing on a lot of these issues that we're talking about, AI, data, privacy, cybersecurity, which in this sort of next decade, I think is going to be the main sort of frontier for the industry-government relationship that we all sort of signed up for when we decided to go into healthcare. Because even the most sleepy widgets, right, that we use consistently, they're all tech-enabled now. Everything is digital, so.
Yeah, and I mean, they've been creating that from the ground up. I remember talking to the gentleman that runs it, and he's like, I feel like I'm running a startup because most of this stuff that we're, we need to figure out has never been done before,
Mm-hmm.
at the regulatory agency, and so we're sort of creating it from scratch.
Right.
So I mean, in a way that's good because he understands the pains that the companies are having to go through in creating something that hasn't been done before. So now let's go back for a second to 2020 and the first wave of coronavirus pandemic, right?
Mm-hmm.
You partnered with some medical centers in New York and New Jersey to start using it to monitor patients. And what did you learn from those studies? And you know, how did the device help
Yeah.
improve treatment?
It's there were two things. I think one, it was all anybody was talking about, and there were so many unknowns about it that we recognized that this was a virus that was affecting the cardiopulmonary complex. Those that were getting sick and were going to the ER had issues there, and that's what we were doing. And so, in the same way that we're looking at potential use cases with the ultimate goal of assessing someone's risk, right? Which is really what we're doing as a
Right.
remote diagnostic company or remote hospital at home patient monitoring company. We went into COVID with that same thesis in doing so. And obviously in our backyard in New York, we got punched in the mouth first in the USA with that. Pretty much everybody I know was infected in March. We were all riding the subway together, up until the last day as sardines. So it was not escapable here. And we're a dense city, right? We all sort of live on top of each other, and our hospitals almost in a week. There were patients in the cafeteria. We were making tent villages for additional beds in Crown Heights, Brooklyn. It was completely overwhelming. And so we really felt like we wanted to do something about it. Now, we would have gotten on patients right away, but we did have to go through the IRB processes, which take time, unfortunately. But we learned a couple things. And the two things actually that we learned is that we're not necessarily super helpful in a acute virus that hits you really fast. The patients that this is sending to the ICU, it's doing so very quickly. It's rare that someone is sick for 3 or 4 weeks. They progress so badly that then they go to the ICU. They have a drop pretty quickly when it happens. So what we found was our study was really to go on patients while they were in the general ward, and the endpoint would be when they were transferred to the ICU because they had gotten so sick, a morbidity event, or they were discharged. And I think we were unable, to be candid, we were unable to find the lead up to that point because we just simply didn't know what patients were coming in. I would have loved data on them from 48 hours beforehand, right?
Right.
We could have learned so much, even very basic functions that Fitbit and Apple Watch were trying to market. I saw a spike in heart rate from all patients that got infected with COVID 48 hours. That is the premise of where I would have loved to go with our granular data. But we're not the type of device that somebody just wears at all times, whether they're sick or not, right? So I think that was a learning experience for us that if there's an unknown of when something's going to hit, it'll be challenging. For infectious disease that becomes chronic disease, I think we're going to be in much better shape. And I think we could definitely do a longitudinal study for the long hauler community, right? The folks that have been infected with COVID and have literally seen symptoms for a year or two. I think there's a lot we could learn longitudinally from there. And that's really where I think our study with our with our great partners at Maimonides Medical Center in Brooklyn and Hackensack in New Jersey and others, across the country would we would be more than happy to participate in some of those longitudinal studies because we don't know what the long hauler is going to look like in 5 to 10 years, right? Or even people that have been infected or the vaccines. Now, that's still a let's figure it out type thing. So it's not, you have to balance sort of running a sales product business versus a research part, but with the right resources and the right partners, we would love to continue that work in COVID, because it's not going anywhere, as you know.
Right.
Unfortunately.
Well, listen, I actually want you to put it into a T-shirt and send me one so that I can wear it and monitor myself. But let's talk about where this technology is going in the future, right? The SimpleSense sash looks, comfortable, convenient, way more comfortable than, say, a Holter monitor. But you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but it's still a specialty device. It isn't sort of made from off-the-shelf materials, et cetera. But do you think there's we're moving to a day where you can sort of embed these sensors in, as I said, a T-shirt, familiar cloth items, so that people can, again, get a more, I'm looking at digital health and saying it has the ability to monitor me and sort of help identify problems before they come up so I can get ahead of them.
Yep.
And so that's how I'm thinking about this technology, because those sensors look pretty small and thin, at least from what I could see visually in the picture. Yeah,
it's we're the first to say we don't know when we don't know, Harry. I know the market wants you to always have an answer for everything. A lot is going to depend on, the additional aspects that we all use in technology stack. Where does 5G take us? Where does increased broadband take us? 10 years ago, we didn't realize everyone in the world would have a smartphone, right? Villages in India and Africa, they have these now. You know what I mean? Right. They may not have running water, but they've got, a Samsung device, right? And so we may have never thought that monitoring in remote places like that, because we couldn't find an economic model to sell shirts or bed sheets, for $1 out there. But maybe with the volume and with the right partners, that's where we could go. We certainly built our stack with that sort of dream in mind. We filed IP and got patents awarded to embed in clothing and bed sheets and upholstery on cars and seat belts and on the steering wheel. And this could be in the gloves of a pilot one day. This could replace your sort of neurological monitoring. We've got a prototype of a headband that's calculating all your EEG and EOG signals, could replace an 18 lead one day. I think when you throw in real good advances in automated supply chain and 3D printing, there's a lot that can be done in this space. And it's going to be done through partnership. We're not going to do it all on our own. No way.
I was going to say, Venk, get to work, man. What are you doing?
Exactly.
We're, let's just look. You're using this in a medical application, but I really want to understand. So, especially if you must have believed in it because you filed the patents, but do you think that this sort of sensor technology could just be a normal part of preventative healthcare and healthy patients?
I think that was always the goal, Harry. What can we do to really help a physician, provider, and ultimately a payer understand someone's risk without them coming in to a hospital or doing a visit? Because really the only people you should be seeing in person are people that need to be seen. Not me for an annual physical, not you for an annual physical, not, somebody in the villages in Africa who really just needs to understand what, they have a fever. Is there something really wrong inside them? That's where I think this should go. It always was that case. We never knew what the right problem was to start to build a business around it. But this should replace your annual physical, your annual checkup for healthy people. This should replace the follow-up visit for your post-surgical, whether you get a knee replacement, an angioplasty, or a stent in your heart, and should replace your chronic disease visits if you have sleep disorder or heart failure, where, do you really have to go get a $10,000 test every 3 months to see if you're regressing, improving, or if you're staying the same? I think that this can democratize all of that in some way, and it's cloth. We all wear clothes every day, right? So
Yeah, I mean, I've looked at all these technological advances, and I look at them as deflationary in a sense, right?
right,
Allowing people to get higher quality care from these technologies because of the information that comes off of it, and then utilizing AI and machine learning and different forms of data analytics to sort of highlight trends and problems, or hopefully no problems, and then if
right,
one comes up, it sort of sticks out like a sore thumb, but it gives you a
hmm
longitudinal view on that patient.
right,
And that's where I see all of this going. I mean, COVID has just pulled everything forward a lot faster than anybody could have
sure.
guessed. And I agree with you. If you look at 5G and all these things coming together, it's going to take it one more leap forward that much faster. I mean, I can imagine a partner for you would be, you know, Apple or Google, thinking about clothing, or Lululemon for that matter, I guess.
Sure.
But somebody that can incorporate this into their materials and make it more available, because I got to believe that there's a consumer application that somebody could take advantage of rather than just a hardcore medical need, if that makes sense.
No, you're absolutely right. And again, this sort of went through our strategic thinking when we were thinking about what we wanted to be when we grew up. And we think that our unique cloth nanosensor technology, which good luck trying to replicate and copy that for anybody who's interested. I mean, that again, this was 40 years of work that sort of had it created, and we're bulletproof protected from a patent standpoint. But we think this can enable all of those markets. Our thesis was always, Harry, if we could start in healthcare with the need to have population, the people that don't have a choice, right? I mean, I can go out for a jog, or I don't need to go out for a jog, right? I can monitor my heart, or I don't need to. But there's a good percentage of the population that doesn't have a choice. They must be monitored. If we could start with that need to have population and prove that it works,
Yes.
prove that it's changing outcomes, why would the nice to have market use something that is already working for sick people, right? And that was kind of always our thesis. We don't really have a timeline on when we're going into the consumer market, but because there are different aspects that are involved there from a business standpoint. Customer acquisition, marketing are the obvious ones, but sexiness, fit, we did not focus on do we look cool. We were focusing on we did put in design. Design is important on everything, don't get me wrong, but we first started with make it work. We didn't start with it has to be this big and then figure it out, right? We started the other way around. So
well, and if you think about all the existing wearable technologies, they incorporate a sensor that everybody understands very well, right? There's no question that temperature monitoring, right? There's no question that if you can have a CGM on you, you can sort of understand what foods affect you positively or negatively.
Yep.
You're right. We need the scientific publication to prove that the technology that you built does what it needs to do. And it's probably all the time going to give you new information. You're going to be like, I didn't know we could figure that out.
Yes.
Right. Which is the beauty of having 85 biomarkers. You're going to find something new all the time. But you could easily see that certain applications would then become accepted and then make its way into mainstream.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I think the more that folks are using, and the cool thing, or not, maybe not cool, maybe some bothers some people, I'm sure, but technology goes one way. It does not go backwards, right? And COVID sort of shifting virtual care into the forefront, which is what technophiles did before. Oh, I just talked to my doctor on the phone. I would have laughed. I was like, what can they do with that, right? Before I started Nanoware, right? but that's not going back, right? If you don't have to go see your physician in person and you've got an alternative now that replaces it, why wouldn't you do that, right? So yeah, I think as people get more accustomed with devices, they'll understand how to differentiate from them. I'm not taking shots at our friends in Cupertino, but there's only so much you can do on the wrist, right?
Absolutely.
If you're not going across the heart, across the lungs, across the brain, you're going to be limited in what you can do. If you just have an armband device that's picking up your pulse rate and your skin temperature, you're limited in what you can do, right? So I think what we're excited about, maybe not just on this form factor and this product, but understanding its application around the body. You can't put a smartwatch around your body, but you can put a cloth around your body. You can put a sheet around your body, right? I think that hopefully the understanding is going to come that there is a delineation between something that's great for the consumer and something that's great for, the healthcare population. And where does that nexus come together? I think that's going to be driven by patients. I don't think it's going to be driven by us. I don't think it's going to be driven by the provider or the payer. I think the patients are going to demand, as they are doing now, right? I mean, the reason providers are buying our solution right now is because the patients are demanding it, right? The payers are kind of demanding it to some extent. Cardiologists would love to see 40 patients a day in their office again. They were really used to that, right?
Yeah, this is a longer debate over a beer at one point.
Can't wait. It is Friday.
So, listen, it was great to talk to you. I'm, healthy congratulations on the latest approval, and look forward to seeing other approvals as you're taking this thing forward. And I can only wish you great success. I mean, I've obviously, since I'm an investor, I have a soft spot in my heart for every entrepreneur out there.
Thank you, Harry, and thank you for the opportunity to spend some time with you and your audience. Hopefully, it's the first of many, and I can come back and give an update in a year or so. And hopefully by then, it's not just about FDA approvals, but I'm showing we really built sales here, because I know investors care about that. Just selling our product in the enterprise for the first time this month in September, and early numbers are great. So it's a really exciting time. I think 6.5 years into the journey, and being able to do it starting with Dad has been pretty special. So thanks for having us, and appreciate you following our progress going forward.
Excellent. Thanks for participating.
Thanks, Harry.